Why developers need to learn about pipelines. My name is Isaac, previous CTO for Funded Startup, and I run the checkout team at Pretty Little Thing. What is a pipeline? Really, it's just a process. Normally automated, but not necessarily. Why do you care? You care because the further you get into your career, it's actually going to be more about not breaking things as opposed to making things work. It becomes about reliability and management, whether that's for junior developers or processors. You become a logical regulator, not just an output machine. This is one of the skills that I picked up later in my career because I worked on my own for so long. But this is something you're really going to want as senior devs. And especially when I started going for interviews for more senior roles, these were the things that would normally trip me up because they'd ask questions about pipelines and, oh, have you done CI/CD? And because I hadn't in the past, it actually was a little bit of an uphill battle. It was something I had to learn. You need at least some experience, and the faster you learn, the better you'll be at system management and the access you'll have to more senior roles. When I first got into tech, I was pretty gung-ho. You build stuff, hopefully it works. If it doesn't, you just keep fixing it. But any profession that's dealing with any kind of money takes things seriously. So, construction has processes. Manufacturing has processes. Code is definitely more on the creative side because it's hard to keep just regurgitating what you've done, and there is a lot of on-the-ground design work and problem solving. But it needs to fit into a reliable mold and have consistent delivery. Pipelines are a series of steps to give you consistent results and reliable control over delivery of your tech. You've probably heard of the term CI and CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment. The whole agile approach of small incremental changes, so bit by bit you deploy segments of code, and that way one significant change you make can completely break the system, and if you need to backtrack, that's fine because you're only taking a small thing back. How do pipelines look in the real world? There's two types of pipeline steps really, which are constraints and automation. Restrictions sound like a bad thing, but they are paramount if you want consistent results. Automation is basically steps that need doing, but you don't want to do them yourself because it's something that humans aren't good at, like holding a lot of states in our head or waiting for certain time periods and then immediately executing. There are tools out there for email marketing, which is great examples. So imagine if you had to email a customer, and then if they respond, you message them back with something, but if they don't respond, then 2 days later you send them a follow-up message. For two customers, cool, you can maybe write down a little notice to remember and then come back to it 2 days later, set a little reminder on your phone. Imagine you got to do that for 100 customers. There's no way you're doing that. You're going to need like spreadsheets. There's a lot more management stuff. So it's not necessarily hard work, but it's being able to keep a bunch of states in memory at once. Like, where is something in the pipeline? What's the next step that needs to happen after what time period? And frankly, humans aren't really good at that. Machines, however, are great, so we lean on them. An example pipeline, going to be very basic, so I don't want to intimidate, just an example of what they look like. It could start as early as the client. You could have Git commit hooks. So when someone's trying to put code up to Git, you can actually run tests beforehand to check if it meets certain requirements before even allowing someone to commit. So it could be like linting, making sure that the code's actually clean and you're not using outdated approaches which are bad for the language, or unit tests, something like that. So before you can even put things to the Git repo, it does a precursor check. That's an example of a constraint. You're blocking people that haven't met a certain requirement. Could be like test percentage. Then when you make a PR on GitHub, you could run through integration tests to check that all that's working, and you don't let anyone merge to the branch until it's confirmed that their tests are actually functional and the code's working. Then everything passes, you merge the PR, it runs a deployment. So it fetches all the secrets from where you need to store them, populates all the environment variables, and actually automatically deploys it for you. You don't have to put in a code command. As soon as you merge something to the main branch, that branch is then deployed. Then when the instance is deployed, it runs an end-to-end test, uses Cypress or something, it goes through the actual website, it does a health check, checks everything's working. If there's a failure, like once after being deployed you're getting a 404 response, revert changes and bring back the old deployment. None of these are crazy things that you've probably done them all before at different stages. You ran a unit test, you might have run a deployment, and I'm doubtless you've run into bugs before and had to think, oh, I've got to revert to an old version. But imagine you don't have to think about these things, and this is kind of what pipelines are about, so that you can actually put your dev power into building stuff instead of having to maintain, which it takes a lot of brain power to manage all this stuff at once, to be honest. The sooner you can remove it, the better your team can actually start performing. The maintenance, I'll be honest, is not easy, but this is kind of the goal, is to be able to not have to worry too much about what the process actually is behind the hood, and to be able to have reliable, consistent results. You probably won't care about this at the beginning of a software cycle, so you're not really got any customers or users and only small deployments are going out. But when you got teams of 35 people all working on code at different points want to do deployments, you need some sort of process where everything gets bottlenecked. It really is horrible. There's different tools you can use for that. So like Husky is something that you can use, which is like pre-git commits, which like I said, before you're even allowed to make a git commit somewhere, Husky can actually block you. I'm going to put the links to all these in the description. You can use Jenkins, Circle CI. The one I'm most familiar with is GitHub Actions, and I've used a little bit of Azure, and that's like for repo management, so you can run like the PR stuff, the deployments, that it's already on where you're deploying to. AWS also have their own deployment tool, so for all your stacks on there, that can make a lot of sense as well. So that's kind of what a pipeline is and the kind of tools that you use to build it. The next part is going to be how do you get better at making them. Okay, resources are the Phoenix project. I've spoken about this before on the channel, I think, but Amazing book, and completely changed the way I actually thought about code as something that's done into a process. Draws a lot on Toyota's revolutionary approach to their manufacturing plans and kind of puts code through a similar lens of moving through a funnel, which really helps you a lot with pipelines and understanding code, and not even necessarily just the code, but how people work with and understand and processes. And I highly recommend. Read up on CI/CD pipelines, because there's already a lot of stuff out there for people that they're a little bit more in depth, so you might not understand some of this stuff yet. There might be words they mention that you find interesting. Look up the word, and then maybe, you know, the definition of something will spark something else. Just see. And then honestly, look up other people's code. You know, like on GitHub, it's a free resource for most people. You can look up pipeline examples. Like even if you go on Circle CI and Jenkins or whatever, they will have code examples of how you set these things up. Even if you don't necessarily understand or why someone would use them, just read through, familiarize yourself a little bit. So don't make it anything intimidating. It's nothing other than automating laborious steps. Every system is going to be different, but there will be fundamental consistencies. Let's say you have a personal project and you want to add steps for deploying. What do you want to happen? First of all, you don't want it to break, right? So you could have something where in GitHub Actions, once everything's been pushed up to the main branch or whatever, you do a deployment. You could do a health check where you just send a simple request to the URL. Does it return a 200? If it doesn't, and it's any of the 400s or 500s, then you revert to an older state. Pretty simple conceptually, but just doing this, you actually learn a lot about how like pipelines need to interact with things, how you need to structure and space out where things are executed, because the order and the execution chain makes a massive difference. And if you want to go further into that, you can look up blue-green deployments, which I'll put a link somewhere. If you have a deployed instance that's currently running and you want to deploy something new, it builds in parallel and it's not actually using it, and then it switches the two over. So suddenly the one that was getting built is now live. If there's a problem with the one that just went live, it can switch them back because it never gets rid of the older deployment it had. So assuming you do a new deployment, until it's absolutely ready to be switched over, it will build, nothing changes, it switches. Let's say there's a big bug with it, you don't even get rid of the other one. So it's still being deployed somewhere, it's just not being used, which means that when you switch back or revert, it's more or less instant. Now we got health check to work, that's cool, but there could be other stuff that could go wrong with the site. So how do we check that? Let's say you wanted to update your fans that you made a new deployment. Maybe every time it's deployed and it's been successful for like 5 minutes, there's been no errors. You tweet about it, it goes to your page that says, hey, you know, check out the new updated website with a link or something like that. And then wait, oh, I only want to do that for releases, I don't want to do that for bug fixes. Okay, well, is there a way that you can check like the branch name to see if it's a release to then only tweet on those things? You know, it's stuff like that. Get creative with it, but it's being able to automate processes you have to do yourself. Okay, so that was just like an overview of how to actually get started with it. I didn't really go too deep into CI/CD, but like a pipeline, what actually is the fundamentals, something worth looking into. If you guys find this interesting, I'll do more content on it, because I do think this is something I don't see too much content on. But yeah, this is just my experience, but I do hope it was useful for someone out there. If you know someone that's currently considering upscaling themselves or want to understand more about pipelines, please send them this video so they can make a more informed decision. Thanks guys.